welcome to everybody. How are you all doing today? Is that better? I don't want to move it around too much because other people aren't as tall as I am. Is that better? Can everybody hear me now? Okay, well, let's try it again. Hello, welcome everyone. How's everyone doing today? All right, good. We got the gremlins out of the system, so we're looking good today. How is everyone? Are you all doing well? That's wonderful. Yeah. I hope you all had a good week, and there's not much of the weekend left, but we hope you have a good weekend too. It's so nice to see everyone here. Of course, everyone here is welcome, and that's what's special about this building is that everyone here is truly welcome, regardless of anything about you. We're all just people, and we're all welcome and loved in here. So thank you for coming and helping us express that love for one another. I have one announcement today. That announcement comes, and it says, there will be another brief meeting after church in the CRE area today regarding the camp out, the Christmas pageant, and the trunk or treat event. If you are interested in helping out with any of these upcoming events, all volunteers are much appreciated. See Bradley or Denise for more info. Thank you. And the CRE area, to my knowledge, has moved from in the back to over here on the south hand wing of the building, so feel free to meet over there. At this point, we are going to have our 8 principals video play, and then we will have that followed by some centering music. I had forgotten to say so before, so let me go ahead and take a moment to remind everyone that this is now a great time to take the opportunity to silence all of your electronic devices. Thank you very much. We will now have the chalice lighting and our opening words. The opening words is going to be found in your blue hymnal, and it will be number 657, and it is a call and response. So if you would please join me, I will read the non-italicized words, and then everyone else may read the italicized words. 657.
Wait, you said blue.
Yes, blue.
Gray.
Is it really?
Yes.
I've always called this blue and that teal. Maybe they started as blue, and that's why I'm thinking of that. Old hymnal, yes. Wonderful. It matters what we believe. 657. It matters what we believe. Some beliefs are like walled gardens. They encourage exclusiveness and the feeling of being especially privileged.
Other beliefs are expansive and lead the way into wider and deeper specificities.
Some beliefs are like shadows, clouding children's days with fears of unknown calamities.
Other beliefs are like sunshine, blessing children with
Some beliefs are divisive, separating the saved from the unsaved, friends from enemies.
Other beliefs are bonds in world community where sincere differences beautify the pattern.
Some beliefs are like blinders, shutting off the power to choose one's own direction.
Other beliefs are like gateways, opening wide vistas for exploration.
Some beliefs weaken a person's selfhood. They blight the growth of resourcefulness.
Other beliefs nurture self-confidence and enrich the feeling of personal worth.
Some beliefs are rigid, like the body of death, impotent in the changing world.
Other beliefs are pliable, like the young sapling, ever growing with the upward thrust of life.
Thank you. That was brought to us by Sophia Lyon Foss, and thank you very much, Sophia, for those very appropriate words for today. We will now move on to our opening hymn, which will be hymn number 139. If the choir will please join us on the stage, and everyone else may rise, and we will sing a joyful noise together. Please join me in reciting the covenant, which is up on the screen. Love is the spirit of this church, and spirits its law. This is our covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. You may be seated. Thank you. I would like to welcome up to the podium Bradley and Joe Vinson. They will be conducting the Time for All Ages.
All right, so this Time for All Ages comes from a webcomic called The Oatmeal by Matthew Inman. Some of you may have seen this. This is a what's called a classroom safe version, so I think it'll be okay for the kids. It's got some big words and big concepts, but it's fun, so I think people will like it.
I'm going to tell you some things. You're not going to believe these things I tell you. And that's okay. You have good reason not to. But I need you to keep listening, regardless of what you believe, I don't care if you're liberal, conservative, or somewhere in between. I don't care if you're a cat person, a dog person, or a tarantula person, morning person or night owl, iPhone or Android, Coke or Pepsi. I don't care. All I care about is that you read this to the end. Sound good? Yes. Then let's begin. You may have heard that George Washington had wooden teeth.
I put the fur in First Amendment.
He lost most of his teeth in his 20s and had a set of dentures made out of wood. It's a disturbing visual. The founding father, commander-in-chief, first president of the United States, click-clacking his way through a ham sandwich.
Would you like a bite? Plop, plop, plop.
Except it isn't true. In 2005, at the National Museum of Dentistry in Baltimore, laser scans were performed on Washington's 200-year-old dentures and found them to be made of gold, lead, hippopotamus ivory, horse, and donkey teeth. His mouth was a petting zoo of nightmares. Upon learning this information, I wanted to ask you something. How did it feel to learn this new fact about George Washington's teeth? I stated a thing, I provided evidence of that thing, and presumably you now believe in the thing I stated. Presumably your belief in the composition of George Washington's teeth has changed with little or no friction. Presumably, the next time you're at a party and George Washington's teeth come up in conversation, you are going to proudly impart this newfound knowledge to your fellow partygoers. Yes? Terrific. Let's continue. What if I told you George Washington had another set of false teeth? What if I told you this other set wasn't made from wood, ivory, or any of the aforementioned materials? What if I told you it was made from the teeth of slaves? Now, let's try this again. How did it feel to learn this fact about George Washington? Any more of that friction I mentioned earlier? Before we go any further, allow me to reiterate, I am not here to convince you that George Washington was a bad person. I could go through all my cited sources and cherry-pick arguments that either deify or demonize George Washington. I could paint a portrait of a monster, or I could exonerate a patriot. But as I said before, I don't care. It's not the point. The point is to give you an emotional barometer of how you feel when presented with new ideas. Because you may have noticed that the first fact about George Washington's teeth was rather easy to accept. I would even wager that when I told you the first fact, you accepted it without question.
Oh my, how gosh darn interesting.
But when I told you the second fact, you immediately checked my sources and are now furiously composing an informed yet incendiary retort which you will boldly deliver to me in the form of a sour, blustering Facebook comment.
I hate your entire everything, you miserable bumfart.
That's okay. That's all part of it. Let's try a few more. Napoleon Bonaparte was not short. He was 5'7", which was taller than the average Frenchman of the time.
You must be this tall to conquer Europe.
Houseflies live for about a month, not 24 hours.
Life is short. False.
Humans don't explode in a vacuum, nor do we boil. We just pass out from lack of oxygen, and then we die.
The three emotional phases of being blown out of an airlock. 1, shock. 2, more shock. 3, oh God, still in shock.
Again, as you read these facts, take stock of how you feel. I'm guessing you softened to the last few fairly easily. Let's try a few more, and then we're done. There is zero evidence that Jesus Christ was born on December 25th.
That's cool. I don't mind that you forgot my birthday for the last 2,000 years.
The Pledge of Allegiance was written by a socialist. 6 of the 7 justices who voted in favor of Roe v. Wade were Republican appointed. How those last 3 feel? Depending on your beliefs, I'm guessing it may have put some of you about here. At the very least, you can concede that it felt different to hear those statements compared to the ones about Napoleon or houseflies. Yes?
Yes.
But why? Why do we easily soften to some ideas but not to others? Why do we gnash our teeth when presented with evidence counter to our beliefs? Why do we not only ignore this evidence but dig our heels in deeper and believe more strongly in the opposing argument? Why would providing more evidence make someone less likely to believe in an idea? It seems crazy and bat-bum crazy bonkers to me. Backwards. It turns out bat-bum crazy bonkers has a name in the world of neuroscience. It's called the backfire effect, and it's a well-documented psychological behavior. A few years ago, at the University of Southern California's Brain and Creativity Institute, a study was conducted where participants were placed into an MRI machine. Once inside, they were presented with counter-arguments to strongly held political beliefs. A few examples.
Laws restricting gun ownership should be made more restrictive. Gay marriage should not be legalized.
As participants were read these counter-arguments, various parts of their brains were scanned for activity.
Pew pew, pew pew.
What the study revealed was that the part of the brain that responds to a physical threat also responds to an intellectual one. This area of the brain is known as the amygdala, and it's the emotional core of your mind. Unfortunately, it makes us biologically wired to react to threatening information the same way we'd react to being attacked by a predator.
I have a knife.
From an evolutionary standpoint, it makes sense. If you were a caveman and another caveman threw a boulder at your head, you would react by logically debating the pros and cons of getting brained.
Frank jealous of Jeff's knife cave. Frank kill Jeff and take cave. Goodbye, Jeff. Now, Frank, I think objectivity is key here.
Core beliefs are the beliefs which people cherish the most deeply. They usually develop from childhood and are compounded by life experiences. Core beliefs are inflexible, rigid, and incredibly sensitive to being challenged.
A belief, soft and squishy. Olives are delicious. A core belief, ironclad. God created velociraptors.
When I told you that George Washington's dentures were made from animal bones, it probably didn't ruffle many feathers. But when I suggested they were made from slave teeth, I'm guessing it caused strife with some of you. There are obvious cultural reasons for this. Slavery is a sensitive, hot-button issue. But there are biological reasons as well. The amygdala of your brain is screaming, "Battle stations!"
Have no fear, I will kill it with swords.
Some of you may have held a worldview that George Washington was a patriot and a hero. By presenting negative information about him, it challenged that worldview. Your brain loves consistency. It builds a worldview like we build a house. It has a foundation and a frame and windows and doors, and it knows exactly how everything fits together. If new piece is introduced and it doesn't fit,
Toot toot.
the whole house falls apart. Your brain protects you by rejecting that piece.
No.
It then builds a fence and a moat and refuses to let in any visitors. This is why we have the backfire effect. It's a biological way of protecting a worldview. Just remember that your worldview isn't a perfect house that was built to last forever. It's a cheap condo, and over time, most of it will fall apart. So, what do we do about this? Some of you have probably been nodding along in agreement, waiting for me to deliver a series of clever, combative ways to offset the backfire effect. The disappointing truth is, I don't have much advice for you. I don't have a way to change the behavior of 7.5 billion people carrying their beliefs around like precious gems wrapped in hand grenades. Sure, there are ways of changing people's minds that are more effective than others, but ultimately, they all fall short. This is compounded by the internet, where anything can be cited as a source, and every disagreement degrades into a room full of orangutans throwing feces at one another.
Wrong, 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 wrong. Froth, froth.
The best I can do is make you aware of it so you can identify the backfire effect in your own brain. Which isn't easy, The mind can't separate the emotional cortex from the logical one. And one could argue that this emotional underbelly is what makes us human. But I would argue that it's also what makes us animals.
I hate your whole everything. I hate you too, Travis.
I sometimes pretend the amygdala of my brain is in my pinky toe. When a core belief is challenged, I imagine it yelling insane things at me.
1 + 3 is 4. Don't listen, Matt. 1 + 3 is tacos.
I let it yell.
Every mathematician in the world just confirmed that it's 4. That's just a conspiracy of taco haters.
I let it have its moment.
How can the sum of 2 integers be Mexican food? Don't disrespect my beliefs.
I let the emotional cortex fight its little fight. And then I listen. And then I change. Because this universe of ours is so achingly beautiful. And we're all in it together. We're all going in the same direction. I'm not here to take control of the wheel or to tell you what to believe. I'm just here to tell you that it's okay to stop, to listen, to change.
We will now sing the children out. Go now in peace, go now in peace. May the spirit of love surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go.
Hello, we will now be passing around the baskets. This is the moment where we take our offertory. It is wonderful that we are all blessed with the 3 T's in some form or fashion: time, treasure, and talent. And this is the part where we're able to give to sustain the running of our church, because lights don't run on, goodwill, unfortunately. Because if it did, then we would never have any power issues. So as the baskets are going around, we will have Mike play us a little music. So enjoy. Okay. Up next, we have our speaker, Joe Vinson. For those of you who don't know, but I assume most of you do, Joe is an accomplished local historian. He has many credentials to his name, but I think the most pertinent for today would be to say that Joe is an absolutely wonderful human being and one of the most level-headed people that I think I've ever met. He is very capable of just even keel 100% of the way through, and I can't imagine anyone better to give the sort of talk that he's about to give us. So please welcome up Joe Vinson.
All right, hi everybody. I am Joe Vinson. I use he, him pronouns. And let's see here. This is a message called How to Deprogram Yourself. 20-something years ago, when I was in high school, I was in the PHSIB program, and we had to take a class called Theory of Knowledge. One day our teacher, shout out to Mr. Cheney, recommended a contemporary work that synthesized and syncretized a number of philosophical and epistemological concepts that we've been talking about in class, and that work was The Matrix. I assume most people here have seen it, so I won't spend too much time explaining the plot, but basically it's that in some point in the future, humans have been enslaved by artificially intelligent machines and live their entire lives in a computer simulation of reality, the eponymous Matrix. Only a small group of liberated humans know the truth, and they are searching for a messiah-like figure called the One who is prophesied to defeat the machines. In one scene, the character Morpheus, who's kind of a John the Baptist figure if we're using the biblical references, tells the protagonist, Neo, that the Matrix is, quote, "It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth." In another scene, he describes the challenge of liberating humans from the Matrix. Quote, "You have to understand, most of these people are not ready to be unplugged. Many of them are so inured, so hopelessly dependent on the system that they will fight to protect it." He later says, quote, "We have a rule. We never free a mind once it's reached a certain age. It's dangerous. The mind has trouble letting go." In other words, the humans stuck in the Matrix have been conditioned to think a certain way that makes it harder for them to imagine, let alone self-actualize their own liberation. And this is true for human development. From birth, we get hardwired in our mental development by our language, by our environment, by our culture. It turns out that babies are incredibly versatile and can discriminate between subtle phonemic sounds at a very young age, but as they get older, they start to lose the ability to differentiate sounds that aren't used in their primary language. There was a study that tested children on their ability to understand complex spatial relationships, like the tightness or looseness of how something fits. Pre-verbal infants demonstrated conceptual readiness for learning the nuance of these relationships, but as children got older and started acquiring language, Korean learners maintained that distinction while English learners lost it. The reason is that in Korean, there are two different verbs, I'm going to butcher the pronunciation here, kita and nota, that express fitting with differing levels of tightness, while in English, it all gets kind of flattened into the one preposition to fit in something. Babies lost their ability to understand a concept because it wasn't supported by their native language. Our minds solidify around the familiar. We start out as malleable dough, but as we bake, we harden to fit the shape of our container. Why is this important? Because as a species, we are always moving forward. Every generation benefits from the constant march of scientific discovery and social progress. Like the song says, "I see babies cry, I watch them grow. They'll learn much more than I'll ever know. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world." But as grown-ups, we risk slowing down that march of progress with our stupid, calcified brains. Like the oatmeal comic we read, it goes something like this. You have a belief or understanding that stems from your upbringing. This belief or understanding is unchallenged for most of your life. You encounter a new situation that threatens the stability of that belief, and it results in mental discomfort. What happens next is crucial. Do you break out of the old mindset, or do you entrench yourself deeper? In the Matrix, Neo is given the choice to break out of the simulation or to remain a captive. It's symbolized by taking either a red pill or a blue pill. After he takes the red pill, he goes through an extremely uncomfortable transition, but then he wakes up enlightened. The idea of being red-pilled has unfortunately been co-opted by reactionary groups. Online misogynists and men's rights activists have used the phrase to describe what they see as a feminist society that subjugates and emasculates men. In far-right circles, being red-pilled can mean subscribing to any number of anti-Semitic or racist conspiracy theories, or rejecting the so-called woke agenda of LGBTQ rights. It's ironic because The Matrix is undoubtedly a trans allegory. The movie's writers and directors, Lana and Lily Wachowski, were previously known as the Wachowski brothers and have both since transitioned. Knowing this, it's pretty obvious to see that The Matrix, the false reality, the world that's been pulled over your eyes, is a metaphor for gender. As the film critic Emily St. James, who is also transgender, said in a 2021 interview with NPR, quote, if you are a trans person, there is this idea that you are living in a muffling cocoon that is keeping you from seeing the reality of yourself. And that cocoon, to some degree, is the idea of fixed gender identity, which is one that society is very built atop. And to be trans, you have to sort of assail that idea, end quote. When Neo breaks free from the world where he was miserable and imprisoned, he finds he has superpowers. The villainous machines even insist on calling him Mr. Anderson, his dead name. All of this was lost on me back in 1999. Like most people my age or older, I grew up with a very fixed idea of gender identity linked to primary sex characteristics. Like the kid said in Kindergarten Cop, boys have a penis, girls have a vagina. That's pretty simple. I didn't need to understand any deeper than that. When trans people were represented in the media I watched growing up, they were either psychopathic villains, like in Psycho or Silence of the Lambs, or they were punchlines. Punchlines, jokes. The YouTuber Lindsay Ellis has a really great video essay called Tracing the Roots of Pop Cultural Transphobia that inventories the countless examples of trans and gender nonconforming people being the butt of jokes, especially in the 90s and 2000s. Ace Ventura, Naked Gun 33 and the Third, Pat from SNL, South Park, Family Guy, That 70s Show, The Hangover, 40-Year-Old Virgin. It was relentless. But gradually, trans representation in media shifted with more positive, sympathetic, and nuanced characters. Orange is the New Black, Transparent, Euphoria. More celebrities transitioned publicly. Public opinions about transgender people began to shift. There was an impressive change in a relatively short period of time. And a lot of people lost their dang minds about it. We're now living through an extreme backlash of that modest social progress of transgender people. What started as wedge issues designed to seem reasonable, concerns about bathroom bills and protecting women's sports, has turned into the flood of rabidly anti-trans legislation aimed at eliminating trans people altogether. There's the right-wing hysteria over Bud Light sponsoring a trans influencer, Dylan Mulvaney, with deranged people performatively shooting cases of Bud Light beer in effigy. Here's a hint, it's not the beer they're wanting to shoot. Just 10 days ago, a woman, Lori Carlton, was killed over a pride flag she had hanging outside her clothing shop in California by a young man whose social media was full of anti-LGBTQ hatred. It's really scary out there. And I really believe that this backlash is the result of that phenomenon, the mental discomfort that people feel when we're presented with new information that contradicts long-held beliefs. Every generation before the current one was inculcated with a strict understanding of gender, and now that some people are saying, actually, gender is different from what you thought it was. Some folks can't handle it. Like Morpheus said, the mind has trouble letting go. This isn't limited to trans rights. Every hot-button culture war issue you can think of follows a similar pattern. Countless people who consider themselves forward-thinking, open-minded progressives have found some issue where they say, the line must be drawn here. This far, no farther. This is how reactionary movements replenish their ranks. So I thought I would offer a few things to keep in mind, suggestions, recommendations, in case you find yourself in that situation. So number one, acknowledge the limits of your own empathy. We talk a lot about empathy in this church, and for good reason. Empathy is great. It's relatively easy for us to have empathy for situations we have experienced or can imagine ourselves experiencing, sustaining an injury, having financial difficulties, losing a loved one. But we're limited by our programming. We've all been indoctrinated into systems of thinking, and this limits our ability to think critically about those systems, even when we are disadvantaged by those systems. People of shared class interest often lack class consciousness to the benefit of the ruling class. Women can internalize misogyny. People of color can internalize white supremacy. LGBTQ plus people can internalize homophobia and transphobia. Our capacity for empathy can actually work against understanding because we might conflate something we experienced with the very different experiences of others. If you hear about someone's struggles with anxiety or depression, you might think, oh, everyone gets sad sometimes. They should just get over it. You might hear about someone's struggle with chronic pain or fatigue and think, oh, what's the big deal? Doesn't everybody get tired? Author J.K. Rowling's now famous pivot into anti-transgender activism is at least partially fueled by her youthful identity as a tomboy. She seems to believe that had she grown up in today's world, she might have felt pressure to transition her gender. But being a tomboy, or not conforming to every feminine stereotype and archetype, is very different from the gender dysphoria that trans people experience. I have a confession to make, something I'm pretty ashamed of. On June 26, 2015, the Supreme Court ruled, in Obergefell v. Hodges, there is a fundamental right to marry that included same-sex couples. That night, as the White House was lit up with the rainbow of the pride flag, I remember watching the news beaming, and I turned to my wife, and offhandedly I said something like, yeah, but I don't think I'll ever understand transgender people. Just a flippant offhand comment. This was barely 8 years ago. Me, a so-called ally. But I wasn't wrong. I don't understand gender dysphoria. There are things we can't understand because we have no context for understanding it. But something that I've come to realize since then is that my understanding is not a requirement. To quote Princess Bubblegum from the show Adventure Time, people get built different. We don't need to figure it out, we just need to respect it. So instead of the golden rule, treat people the way you'd like to be treated, let's try to follow the platinum rule, treat people the way they'd like to be treated. All right, number 2, be careful tying your identity to any one thing. You're probably familiar with the phrase cognitive dissonance, the mental toll associated with simultaneously holding conflicting beliefs, contradictory beliefs. But you may not be aware of the study where it was coined. Social psychologist Leon Festinger went undercover with a doomsday cult that believed aliens would destroy the world on December 21st, 1954. And before that point, the members of the cult would be saved by these aliens. Festinger was curious what would happen when the day came and went without the world's end, assuming that it didn't happen. What he found was that the cult members, many of whom had quit their jobs and sold all of their worldly possessions ahead of the projected day, didn't accept that they were wrong. Instead, they reaffirmed their faith in the aliens who had failed to appear, and they proselytized even more fervently. Their identity was inextricable from the cult, so they modified their reality to suit it. It's the backfire effect, right? Sometimes the more contradictory evidence there is to refute a belief, the more someone believes it, because the alternative we can't process it. This happens all the time in cult-like environments. I could probably go into great depth about QAnon as one example, but honestly, I don't want to. I doubt that it's relevant to the folks listening to this. But we all have ways in which we tether ourselves to an identity or a relationship, and it can be very difficult to adjust if you find you no longer fit there. Maybe it's a job. Maybe it's a certain religious belief you no longer hold. Maybe it's a friend group that you've grown apart from. Maybe it's prescriptive ideas about gender roles or the right way to be a good parent or sibling or child. We all contain multitudes. So I would just say, don't define yourself in a way that you can't change or that surrenders your agency to forces outside your control. Give yourself room to grow. Number 3, be willing to incorporate new data or a new paradigm. This does not mean that we should be credulous. If someone presents their evidence that the world is flat or that it's only 6,000 years old, don't just take their word for it. Evaluate it on its merits or lack thereof. We all have these devices in our pockets that can bring all the world's information to us, instant access. The problem is that a lot of it is completely wrong. The value of doing your own research is kind of pointless when most people can't separate fact from whatever results Google vomits up. Dan McClellan, a Bible scholar who debunks TikTok videos by armchair theologians, has a saying that we need more people who can think critically and Google competently. It's incumbent on all of us to be critical thinkers, and that includes listening to experts. In the last few years, I know we've all become experts at various points on virology, on constitutional law, on Ukrainian military tactics, on deep-sea submersible design. But sometimes we need to step back and acknowledge that there are a lot of smart people who have put a lot of thought into these things, and sometimes we can just let them take care of it. Here's an example you may remember: Common Core. The idea behind Common Core was that different states had all these different educational standards, and this was going to be a way of getting students in all 50 states together on the same page, so that when they went off to college and crossed state lines, there would be a shared foundation. But everything fell apart when young kids started asking their parents for help with math. See, people my age and older were taught to do math, simple math, a certain way, the standard algorithm. We learned to subtract and multiply by writing down the numbers in rows and columns and kind of tackling them one section at a time and borrowing or carrying a lot of ones. We hated it, but we trudged through it and it worked. Dagnabbit. Behind the scenes, a bunch of eggheads realized that this wasn't the best way for kids to conceptualize math. It would be better, could you go back one? It would be better to understand the relationship between numbers more intuitively. So the pedagogical experts designed new methods, things like number lines and the counting up method, that supplemented the standard algorithm we all learned. But those eggheads underestimated the power of righteous parental embarrassment. When mom and dad had no idea how to solve their third graders' math problems, they were humiliated. The mental discomfort was through the roof. And it became a huge political issue that ultimately doomed Common Core. But here's the thing. New data, new methods, even if they seem contradictory or mutually exclusive with the things we know, don't always negate our previous understanding. They can offer a more complete understanding. Isaac Newton's theories of gravity were replaced by Albert Einstein's theories of relativity, but that didn't make Newtonian physics wrong. Newtonian physics still work great if you're not moving at near light speeds. The obvious answer isn't always the most correct answer. If I ask someone how long a yardstick is, the obvious answer is it's a yard. If I ask how much a pound of lead weighs, the obvious answer is it's a pound. If someone were to answer back, well, it depends on how fast you're moving, you might think they were being quite silly. But things that seem obvious break down under relativistic conditions. Consider this one. What is a woman? That was the central question of a documentary released by the conservative media outlet The Daily Wire. Host Matt Walsh went around asking a lot of people the titular question that, to him and his audience, had a very obvious and unequivocal answer. A woman is an adult human female. And while that may be a perfectly suitable answer for most women, it's not comprehensive. Being inclusive of trans women does not negate or diminish the existence of cisgender women. One interview from this documentary went somewhat viral. A gender studies professor at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, after some cajoling, gave this response. What is a woman? Quote, "For me, it's actually a really simple answer, and that's a person who identifies as a woman." To Walsh and the people who agree with him, this was a ludicrous tautology. But when people say trans women are women, they don't mean that trans women are identical in every way to cis women. They're talking about the social construct of womanhood. Gender-critical feminists might say in response, well, that erases biology. The physical differences between a female body and a male body are essential to the experience of womanhood. And look, admittedly, I'm about as qualified to address this as Matt Walsh is. But another way to think about this is motherhood. If I were to ask what is a mother, it might seem perfectly reasonable and obvious to say someone who has given birth to a child. That's the biological essentialist answer, and it's true for most mothers, but it's not comprehensive. Most people, or many people, who are mothers have never given birth to a child. It doesn't erase biology to acknowledge that adoptive mothers are mothers, that stepmothers are mothers, and so on. A paradigm shift doesn't mean that the previous paradigm was wrong. It can simply mean a more thorough and inclusive understanding. And the last one, number 4, accept good faith criticism without taking it personally. It's going to happen to all of us. Something that we believed is going to be challenged, and we will feel that mental discomfort ourselves. Because as society moves along the arc of history, our shared understanding of issues will change. This is incremental, often disappointingly so. We can look back at so-called progressive thinkers of the past and see how they were limited by the internalized systems of oppression of their time. The framers of the U.S. Constitution believed in Enlightenment ideals of liberty and democracy, but only for free, white, land-owning men. In the lead up to the Civil War, many abolitionists, including Abraham Lincoln, passionately opposed slavery, while still subscribing to white separatism and white supremacy. Likewise, many of us have practices and beliefs that will be considered backward or barbaric by our descendants. Our consumption of fossil fuels, our treatment of animals, our passive tolerance of worker exploitation. Even if we oppose those things individually now, they're still tolerated by society, accepted in the macro sense. At a certain point, society will change. The Overton window will shift. And in every generation, there are people who resist this change. Archie Bunker represented the members of the greatest generation who couldn't keep up with the huge social changes happening all around them. In the 80s and 90s, baby boomers got very upset about the so-called political correctness running amok, policing the things they can and can't say. And lately, we've all heard about wokeness and cancel culture from Gen Xers and others who think nobody's allowed to make jokes anymore. It's all just the same thing, though, right? It's the mental discomfort. People grew up thinking it was okay to have certain beliefs or say certain things. Society progressed around them. And now, if they express those things, they face social consequences, and they're mad about it. And it's natural to get defensive when this happens. And that's a precarious time, because when people get criticized, it's easy to retreat to the people who aren't criticizing them, the ones who say, "You did nothing wrong." There's a phenomenon called crank magnetism. The idea that people who hold one fringe belief, like young earth creationism, for example, are more likely to get drawn into other fringe beliefs, like anti-vax, white nationalism, because they've already been criticized and rejected by mainstream society, so what do they have to lose? If you believe the entire scientific community is lying about how old dinosaur fossils are, then how can you trust what they say about vaccines or the moon landing? A lot of people tiptoe into reactionary waters and then end up diving all the way in after facing criticism. I remember when J.K. Rowling first responded to criticism about her apparent anti-trans beliefs. She said things like, quote, "I'd march with you if you were discriminated against on the basis of being trans." She doesn't say that kind of thing anymore. She used to be outspoken on a number of progressive issues, but now it's just really nothing but anti-trans vitriol disguised as feminism, even though she amplifies people like Matt Walsh who are unabashedly anti-feminist. Practically speaking, it would be great not to lose people down this reactionary rabbit hole. We can try to help people when they find themselves in this position. That doesn't mean excusing bigotry or staying quiet, but we can show grace. A lot of people have good intentions and just don't know better, and I count myself among them. I'll share another embarrassing story. Back in 2002, I came home from my year abroad in Japan for winter break, and I remember going to visit my friend and our fellow congregant, Carol Hemme. I remember recounting some funny stories about my classes, and I mentioned that one of my Japanese professors had this funny word he was calling gypsies, something like Roma. I had never heard of it before. And Carol very politely said that, no, the professor was right. The preferred term, the demonym, is Roma or Romani, and not gypsy. I was quietly horrified, but I was so grateful to Carol for giving me the space to grow, to be corrected without judgment. So let's just acknowledge that we're going to mess up. Some of our notions will eventually be outdated. Some jokes we used to think were hilarious, we'll reevaluate. We'll see that really what they were doing was punching down, making marginalized people the punchline, and we'll decide that it's not actually that funny anymore. We're going to get someone's pronouns wrong, and we'll probably do it again and maybe a third and fourth time. But if we accept criticism in good faith, and if we provide it to others with grace, I think we'll eventually get better, and we'll get there together. Thank you.
If the choir will please join me up here, we will sing together hymn number 338, I Seek the Spirit of a Child. That is hymn number 338, I Seek the Spirit of a Child. Our closing words are another call and response, and they are found at 6:50. Again, read the congregation will read the italicized parts, and yes. Cherish your doubts. Cherish your doubts, for doubt is the attendant of truth.
Doubt is the key to the door of knowledge. It is the servant of discovery.
A belief which may not be questioned binds us to err, for there is incompleteness and imperfection in every belief.
Doubt is the touchstone of truth. It is an acid which eats away the false.
Let no one fear for the truth, that doubt may consume it, for doubt is a testing of belief.
The truth standing boldly and unafraid. It is not shaken by the testing.
For truth, if it be truth, arises from each testing stronger, more secure.
Those that would silence doubt are filled with fear. Their houses are built on shifting sands.
But those who fear not doubt and know its use are founded on rock.
They shall walk in the light of growing knowledge. The work of their hands shall endure.
Therefore, let us not fear doubt, but let us rejoice in its help.
It is to rise as a staff to love. Doubt is the attendant of truth.
That was brought to us by Robert T. Weston. Thank you, everyone. Go in peace.